So a few months ago I was boiling potatoes and thought to myself, man, this is slow. As a result, I ended up eating undercooked potatoes. I prepared them by chopping them into moderately sized cubes and dumping them into water set to boil. While this may seem like an intuitive and normal way to prepare potatoes, it isn't the fastest in terms of actual cooking time. To see why, we should take a look at fast food restaurants and food manufacturers, because the basic idea behind capitalism suggests that companies will eventually converge on producing the best product in the most efficient manner. Or in terms of potatoes, companies will learn to cook potatoes in the most efficient manner. And taking a look at French fries and potato chips, we'd see that cubed potatoes don't really exist. Now intuitively this makes some sense. A thin piece of food will cook much faster than a thick piece of food, so skinny sticks and thin slices of potato will cook fairly quickly. But obviously if you look at a French fry, you can obviously chop it up into tiny cubes and cook them much faster, right? Now this might be a bit counterintuitive, but you don't actually gain much from cutting up a French fry. For example, cutting a 6mm thick 10cm long French fry into 16 smaller cubes might seem like it would cook somewhere around the order of 16 times faster, but we can use numerical simulations to verify this assumption. Note that I have no idea how French fries work and couldn't find any articles detailing the internal temperature of a cooked French fry within a 5-minute Google search, so my model might be completely inaccurate. But I verified the accuracy of my simulation with the results from some boiled potatoes, so this should at least be true for some extremely soggy French fries. Double note that I chose to do a simulation because analytical solutions to the heat equation require a non-zero amount of effort. Comparing the cook times of a French fry and a small cubed potato, we'd find that the cubed potato only cooks about 50% faster than a French fry rather than 1000% faster. But it makes sense if you really think about it. A French fry has 4 long rectangular faces and 2 small square faces. Since the square faces are extremely far from the center of the French fry essentially only has 4 heating nodes that have any effect on the center. The cubic potato has 6 faces and essentially 6 heating nodes, so it can at most only heat up the center 50% faster. However, it's slower than 50% faster because the regions these heating nodes cover overlap. And since heat transfer is dependent on a temperature gradient, the total amount of heat transferred into the overlapping region is lower than if the two regions were separate. And to further illustrate this difference, if we were to compare a French fry and a cubed potato with the same volume as the French fry, which would have a thickness of around 15mm, the cube would take about 4 times longer to cook. This logic extends to potato chips too, meaning thin potato chips would cook much faster than French fries of a similar volume. So in other words, if you wanted to make mashed potatoes, the fastest way would be by cutting the potato into thin slices instead of relatively thick cubes. If you're worried about cut economy or the number of cuts required to properly cut your potato, consider this. It might take around 5 or 6 cuts to properly cube your potato, whereas those 5 or 6 cuts can produce sliced potatoes with around 1/3 of the thickness of cubed potatoes, which will cook in about 1/4 of the time depending on the level of doneness you want. Of course, all cuts aren't equal and depend on your proficiency with a knife, but since I'm only concerned with the actual cooking time in this video, I'm going to pretend I didn't say that. But this doesn't explain why French fries are served in restaurants instead of potato chips. If potato chips are so efficient to cook, then why don't places like In-N-Out serve them? There are several factors that are beyond my scope of fucks to give, but I've come up with a few simple reasons that are good enough for me. First, physics doesn't really care about which direction time flows in. Time could go forwards or backwards and the universe would still obey most of the same physical laws. Meaning shapes that heat up quickly are also shapes that cool off quickly, since cooling off is like heating up backwards. Potato chips are crisp with rigid shapes, meaning there will be a lot of air in a basket of chips. Since air is pretty good at cooling things off, and since potato chips have good geometry for heat transfer, potato chips will cool off extremely quickly. Now, depending on who you ask, this might be a good thing, but generally I'm assuming people want to eat warm food at restaurants. If you're not like me and you don't immediately inhale your food as soon as you see it, then you might be left with half a basket of cold chips before you finish eating. But French fries have a bit more thickness to them and less air in between, and so will hold the heat a bit longer. And the reason you'd pick french fries over potato slices is because the more edges you have, the crispier your potatoes will be. Edges are the intersection of two heating surfaces, meaning they will generally heat up faster than a region next to only one heating surface, meaning they cook more and become crispier. And it turns out people generally like the crispy texture of french fries. So french fries are basically the middle ground. Not too thin as to cool off too quickly, but small enough to crisp really well.